Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. This week is a solo edition. The Swim Brief is brought to you by Jersey Wahoo Swim Club, a USA Swimming silver medal club, third year in a row here in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. We're just about to open our brand new dryland facility. Lots of exciting things going on in Jersey Wahoo's world. We also had 2 snow days last week in my daughter's public school. And those of you who've been following the podcast for a really long time know that such interruptions can forestall the recording of a Swim Brief podcast. I would love to tell you that, I was a consummate professional who is always going to get that stuff out at the same time every week. The reality of it is that when I've got small children at home, these podcasts don't get recorded. But you didn't come here for family talk, came here for the concise, sharp swimming commentary you expect from the Swim Brief. So let me tell you what you've got on tap today. I want to talk about that 50 breaststroke world record by Emre Sakci. That's my best Turkish. I did learn 100 words of Turkish at one point in my life. So I'm pretty sure that C spelled, that special C-like letter is a ch sound in Turkish. Going to talk about the Tier Pro series being canceled. Going to talk about some of the mid-season projections that SwimSwam has come out with. And then finally, I'm going to round up talking a bit about the recent social media explosions of 75s with fins, and a little addendum, a personal addendum. So if you want to listen all the way to the end to hear something about me, you're welcome to do that. Or if you get to like 5 minutes left with this, just realize that I'm going to be talking about myself. And if if that's not what you're into, you can always just turn it off at that point. Okay, let's talk about this 50 breaststroke world record. This does fit into several of my wheelhouses, one of which being breaststroke, the other one being really tall people. And then, there's a little bit of controversy around it as well. Want to get to that. There's breaking news as we record this that Sakci is trying to get his disqualification overturned from the recent World Short Course Championships. I feel like that kind of thing is extremely unlikely, but it's an interesting response because Sakci was disqualified at the World Short Course Championships. They used underwater cameras to enhance, I guess, the officiating of that meet, and it resulted in a number of disqualifications in breaststroke where swimmers were called out for too much of a dolphin kick like motion in their breaststroke. And then he went to his national short course championship and swam this absolutely, he swam 0.6 faster than the race that he was disqualified for. So just a massive improvement in the 50. And I actually have some race footage. So I just want to watch the race on here. For those of you listening to the audio version of it, you can always watch by yourself and get to that part. I'm going to talk over it anyway. So it's not like there's going to be dead silence, but so let's optimize for video here. That seems to work a bit better. And here we have the full screen. So this video picks up literally right off the start, which is an important thing. You can see Sakci here in the middle. Actually, he has some amazing reaction time. This is not to bleed into a whole nother topic, but another secret passion of mine is 50 world records that are, I don't know, or sprint races that are a little bit suspect, where one swimmer in the water seems to get a much better start than everybody else. I can't for the life of me judge on the basis of this video whether he was allowed to false start. But it's just interesting that, you know, in this field, he is definitely has to be the biggest person, which is a hindrance when it comes to reaction time. It overall is a gigantic advantage, as you'll see off the start, no pun intended, being a giant person. But in terms of just pure raw reaction time, usually, you know, with a bigger body, you're going to be a little bit shorter off the blocks. And we can see here on this freeze frame at the beginning that he has some excellent reaction time. And he's already a half body length, basically just off the dive and maintaining his line into the water. And one of the reasons why, one of the ways you could explain, like, okay, how is this guy so much faster at his regional championships, or sorry, his national championships than a meet like World Short Course? Well, a meet like World Short Course, he's swimming in a field of people that are pretty close to him in time. And in a sprint race, it's actually quite a big advantage to have calm water in the lanes next to you. If you want to go watch, but one of the best examples of this, and one of my other suspect 50 world records, when Alex Popov set a 50 free world record at 21.6, he had empty lanes next to him, and he was somehow allowed to get a much better start than everybody he was competing against in this special time trial. I've always been very, very, very suspicious of that swim, but you can't underestimate the advantage you get from having that open water. I think anybody who sprints will tell you that unless you're somehow still stuck at the stage where you need somebody else close to you in speed next to you to motivate you to go your fastest, which is not, I think, a quality that any sprinter at this level has, then it's a nice advantage to be able to have that open water next to you. And he gets that from being a big guy. He's going to break out right at the 15-meter mark. I'm not going to get into the Herbie Beam discussion of late breath. Going off this clock in the corner, he seems to have made it to the wall in less than 10 seconds. That cannot be true. That actually does make me curious. When does that clock show up? Yeah, so that clock just has to be behind the action, because there's no way he's at the 15, almost at the 15 with his head at 3.7 seconds. So that clock is just behind what's happening. Somebody should put a watch to this, though, and then see whether the start was legit. I don't have the wherewithal to do this while I'm recording a podcast. So anyway, he's getting here to the wall. He hits the wall exact. He does a very good job. Again, just the skill level that he's swimming at for somebody that's 6'8". And I mean, when I say he's a giant, he's about as big as a swimmer gets. And breaststroke in particular is not a stroke where size seems to be at least as much correlated with success. And that is that some shorter swimmers than, let's say, the 100 freestyle can reach international quality. But if you're a really big guy, it's still an advantage if you can match that with some skill. And he's swimming with a lot of skill. Good turn. Another very well orchestrated pull out. One thing I'm noticing here is just how well he transitions. Watch this again. How well he transitions from his final kick into swimming. It's almost instantaneous. And this is something I think many coaches are trying to teach, is there's often a delay. Swimmers finish their pull out, they do that kick, get their hands forward, and then there's quite some time before they're ready to start swimming, or they actually start swimming. Here, watch this transition. Boom, right into swimming. Transitions into swimming with the maximal speed. Got everything working for him. And he hits the finish exactly as well. And again, I'm not going to get into the disqualification stuff just beyond the intrigue of it, because from this video, you obviously can't judge whether or not he's committing the same infraction that he got disqualified for at the World Championships. And there are some, I think, legitimate arguments for how he could have swum this much faster. There's some really freakish results that occasionally happen in a 50 race. Talked about Popov earlier, talked about this one. Now, Popov's obviously a guy who was at a really high level for a long time, but somehow he had this 150 that was a couple tenths faster, at least, than he otherwise ever swam. Sarah Schustrom's long course 50 fly world record. That's one where I don't think there was any start shenanigans or anything, but there might have been a little bit of a tailwind in the outdoor pool where that was recorded, or currents. I remember coaching at a pool in Denmark where it was worth at least a half second if you were in lane 4 versus lane 8. I didn't understand why more, like Jeanette Addison didn't take a crack at the world record in lane 4 of that pool, because it was worth a lot current wise to be able to do that. And, the 50s are, at least the 50 long course is unique in that if you have a current going one way, yeah, it's a big advantage to be going that way in the right lane in that direction. So kudos to him. I think, of course, it's excitingly fast to see 24 there in a 50 breaststroke, and plenty for people to learn from watching the swim. And if you want to get more into the nitty gritty about breath timing, there's a very popular Herbie Beam tweet out there. Okay, back to the rest of the podcast. I want to talk about the Tier Pro series that was canceled. And really, nobody listens to this podcast for COVID news, but I want to talk about it in the context of, even internally within our own team, the conversation we've had about the foreseeable future is that everybody's got to be a little bit patient. I've got a lot of kids that swim high school. Their meets are getting canceled left and right, rightfully so. By the way, I'm also noticing that I still have the Sakci swim in my background, and he's finished swimming. The clock in the upper left says 23.8. So, you can never trust these clocks that are running in the corner. And I think just in a broader context, even up to these really, really high level meets, in many ways, we're probably lucky that stuff that's quote unquote more important is not happening right now, because it's just a logistical nightmare for anybody to be able to coordinate some sort of large scale competition or even practice. I've had some lightly attended practices recently, and rightfully so, right? People are, I think, are taking the proper precautions and following things. And hopefully this is just another blip where everyone's got to be a little bit patient for the foreseeable future. Okay, let's talk about these mid-season projections that SwimSwam did, these scored psych sheets. Now, these don't include diving points, which is understandable because we don't have as cut and dry a way to predict diving scoring this far out. It doesn't have, diving scores don't have the same consistency as a swimming time. So, in that way, for actually projecting NCAA results, they're quite imperfect. But I just wanted to talk about, I think, a few interesting things that I noticed looking at it. I'll talk with the women's first. And I think, obviously the headline is that UVA is on top. And I don't think anybody that is reasonably, you're even casually following NCAA women's swimming would expect anything else. The surprises, and prior to this, of course, there was a list of, potential NCAA qualifiers, and UVA, I think, only had 13, whereas Tennessee and California had, could send the maximum. amount of swimmers, which is usually, being able to send the maximum amount of swimmers is usually means that you're going to finish at least in the top 5. And we'll get to some of those surprises um, later. But UVA just has so much star power in that 13 that it far outweighs just having additional qualifiers, because nearly every person that they would bring in that 13 would bring home a lot of individual points. The surprises for me, again, as somebody who maybe a little more than casually follows, starts really at number 2. I had and this is Alabama. I had the impression that Alabama was having an awesome season. Don't get me wrong. I had been watching. I'd been really pleasantly surprised by how they were doing. I was preparing by season end to eat some crow on anything mildly disparaging I had said about the Margot Gear hire, because they are performing quite well. And it's borne out that, again, if you just look at swimming points, Alabama right now is set up to beat Stanford, beat NC State, beat Texas, who's having a very impressive season, but was 5th in this. We'll see how that holds up towards the end of the year. But so far, they're off to a really good start. They've set themselves up, but there's nothing wrong with swimming fast, right? There is maybe something to analyze if they can't back up most of that swimming fast at the end of the year. That's what everybody's trying to do. So that should be your goal, but we'll see. And then, interestingly enough, I said, like having a sort of max roster, it's usually an indicator you can at least finish in the top 5. Oftentimes it's the team that wins that, or the teams that are sort of battling out for 1 and 2 that have this. Well, you have Tennessee projected at 6th. I think traditionally they have decent support from their diving, but that's backed up by absolutely no research prior to the recording of this podcast. California all the way down at 8. I'm surprised that it's that low, but I would love to see some historical data on this. I don't think we're going to get that. I think we should be happy that we're just getting this at least to talk about. But of course, as a California homer, I feel like there's been many years where they haven't necessarily looked like the most impressive team at midseason, and they're sort of right there at the end of the year. By the way, did you know that Terry McKeever's full name is Teresa Jean McKeever? I learned that today because I looked up who was coaching on the 2004 Olympic team, and Teresa Jean McKeever was on the roster. Okay, let's move on to the men's. I can look down the women's a little bit more. If there's anything terribly shocking, I don't think so. We switch over to the men's. Again, Texas just dominantly out in front. They're more than 200 points ahead of the next best team, which again, I think to me is a bit of a surprise who that is. But it just seems like foregone conclusion on Texas that it's just almost impossible that they won't win. I know actually they have a diver who's been provisionally suspended by Safe Sport, and that will probably affect their ability to score a lot of diving points. But just on swimming points alone, right, for them to be this far out in front is almost a new level of dominance for a team that has won so much. Arizona State in second. Again, this is actually a very Alabama-like story to me, in that I had a sense that Arizona State was doing extremely well this year, but I didn't know that they, for instance, have had a better performance thus far than California, right? Or Florida or NC State or Indiana. I wouldn't have said that definitively. So maybe that reveals my own ignorance about what's been happening But kudos to them getting up there. Kudos to Bob Bowman. I wonder, how much conversation we're going to have at the end of the year about Bowman's redshirt decision, especially if they come out of this as a much stronger team. I think, you know, there's a healthy conversation to be had about that. If that comes through as the case, looking down this a little bit, of course, I guess what else I have to add? Not very much. I think the rest of this is pretty straightforward, what you would expect to see out of these. I guess I'm a little surprised to see Arizona in there. I'm looking at Auburn in both of these because it's like I think people love to gossip about how horrible Auburn is, and yet, I think they're top 25 in both genders. I know in the context of the history of Auburn, that's not very good, but it's not as if they're a bad team either. And of course, friend of the pod, Ryan Wakamerka, we're cheering for him to get some forward momentum with that historical program. I'm looking for my man. If I look back at the women's one, of course, I'm looking for my man, Matt Leach at Washington State, see if he can't break through this year. He's landing some really good recruits. So a shout out to him. Okay. Finally, before I talk about myself, talk about this 75 thing. So let me see if I can provide a decent background on what's happened here. As far as I can tell, Coleman Hodges Hodges, right? That's the Coleman I'm talking about. Gosh, I'm so confused. Went to do a practice in pancakes at Harvard University. By the way, Coleman, you're welcome here whenever you want. Southern New Jersey, beautiful area. And during the course of filming a practice, witnessed 28-second 75 from Dean Ferris, everybody's favorite, every swim commentator's favorite athlete. And then we were treated to a series of response videos from other athletes, sort of talking back. There was a Brooks Curry one. And I think where this thing ended up, what sort of brought this 75 free, which I actually jokingly texted my coworkers a few days into it that, did you see that Thomas Heilman broke the NAG record in the 75 with fins? And neither of them were sure that I was kidding about that. But where it ended up was, first Ryan Held threw down an actual sub 30 75 without wearing any fins. And a sprinter from Northwestern beat all these elite, high-end level college sprinters. And he's a fair swimmer himself. He's not on the level of Ferris or Brooks Curry with a 27-second one, which is all a reminder that this was good fun. But I do think that for a 75 with fins, I think almost like you can reach a certain level of fast swimming where you won't necessarily be able to produce a more impressive fin swim because you've maximized your kicking potential so much without fins, that the fins don't confer as much advantage to you. Whereas there's a sweet spot where maybe you haven't fully maximized that, but you can still really do something amazing. I am of the opinion that I was not impressed by these guys going basically NCAA A final sprint speed swimming with fins on. I'd be impressed if they did it without fins like Ryan Held did, or I'd be impressed if they could just kick with fins at that speed. But that end of it, I think, seemed a little silly. And I think most people who've coached would agree that, there's definitely more there. But then again, what's the point? It's a 75 with fins. So, which brings us to the concluding part of this. And, I hope to have somebody on with me so that, they could give me a hard time about it. But this podcast is now like my blog. I haven't blogged, I think, in over a year. So I have, over the last few months, I'm not going to get too into depth in this. I've resolved a few health issues, and I'm having a really good time training again. When I say training, I'm not doing any swimming. But things are going so well working out otherwise that I have been tempted to do one more competitive swimming comeback. People who follow the blog know that I made an attempt, we'd call it an attempt, to break a minute in the 100 breaststroke at 106. That was 4 years ago. Now I've not competed since then. I still haven't done a practice yet. So of course, this is all extremely presumptive, but inspired by a friend of the pod, Trevor Gray, and his amazing escapades. And he has helped me so much with some of the stuff I've been dealing with, and just sorting out a lot of the things you need to sort out as you get older to just be able to train, effectively. So it's got me pondering another swimming comeback. I think if I'm going to change anything this time is from 4 years ago, is that I'm just going to use my friends a lot more. Joel and Eric, who you've heard on this podcast, I sent them a video of me racing 4 years ago. I hazard to count, they maybe had 9 things that they thought was really bad about my breaststroke. So there's still a lot of room. The good news is, here's my optimism at work, there's still a lot of room for improvement, even at age 38. I'm inspired by the James Fike stuff. So cool to see him. He's even older than I am, going 53 in the 100 breaststroke when he was I think a 55 in college. So this stuff is really cool, and I'm starting to feel the itch again. So if you have an opinion on that, you can always reach out to me. Let me know what you think. If you think you have specialized knowledge where you're somehow going to push me over the top to have a good older adult, middle-aged adult results here, I'm listening to all takers. But this is more admitting this just to put a little bit of pressure on myself, in case I actually do it. So thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you for sticking with us here through some interruptions. And later this week, I'm going to have a big breakdown of one foreign country's Olympic results. I'm going to talk to a coach from there. And I know you can, spoiler, you're going to have to guess what country I might be breaking down. If you listen for a long time, it won't be too hard pressed to figure it out, but we'll do that. I think it'll be nice to take a more comprehensive look at just one country's sort of Olympic results in retrospect, now that we've had some time and distance to get back from it. And then we'll keep rolling, hopefully later in the week with another podcast with Joel and Eric, and get you back to the news. Thank you, and see you next week.